Welcome back, gods, demigods, and friendly monsters. I'm going to be continuing Percy the Olympians, Chapter 10. Not Chapter, Lightning Thief, Chapter 10. I'm Ruin, a perfectly good bus. Part 1. It didn't take long for me to pack. I decided to leave the Minotaur horn in my cabin, which left me with only an extra change of clothes and a toothbrush to stuff in my backpack. Grover had found me. The camp store loaned me $100 in mortal money and 20 golden drachmas. These coins were big as Girl Scout cookies and had images of various Greek gods stamped on one side and the Empire State Building on the other. The ancient mortal drachmas had been silver. Cameron told us, but Olympians never used less than pure gold. Cameron said that the coins might come in handy for non-mortal transactions, whatever that meant. He gave Annabeth and me both a canteen of nectar, a Ziploc bag full of ambrosia squares to be used only in emergencies, if we are seriously hurt. It was god food, Cameron reminded us. It would cure us of almost any injury, but it was lethal to mortals. Too much of it would make a half-blood very, very feverish, and an overdose would burn us up, literally. Annabeth was bringing her magic Yankees cap, which she told me had been a 12th birthday present from her mom. She carried a book on famous classical architecture written in ancient Greek to read when she got bored. A long bronze knife hidden in her shirt sleeve. I was sure the knife would get us busted the first time we went through a metal detector. Grover wore his fake feet and his pants to pass as human. He wore a green Rasta-style hat because when it rained, his curly hair flattened and you could just see the tips of his horns. His bright orange backpack was full of scrap metal and apples to snack on. In his pocket was a set of reed pipes his daddy carved from him. And even though he only knew 2 songs, Mozart's Piano Concert No. 12 and Hilary's Duff, So Yesterday, both of which sounded pretty bad on reed pipes. We waved goodbye to the other campers, took one last look at the strawberry fields, the ocean, and the big house, then hiked up Half-Blood Hill to the tall pine tree that used to be Thalia, daughter of Zeus. Karen was waiting for us in his wheelchair. Next to him stood the surfer dude I'd seen when I was recovering in the sick room. According to Grover, the guy was the camp's head of security. He supposedly had eyes all over his body, so he could never be surprised. Today, though, he was wearing a chauffeur's uniform, so I could only see extra peepers on his hands, face, and neck. This is Argus, Cameron told me. He would drive you into the city and keep an eye on things. I heard footsteps behind us. Luke came running up the hill, carrying a pair of basketball shoes. Hey, he panted. Glad I caught you. Annabeth blushed, the way she always did when Luke was around. Just wanted to say good luck, Luke told me, and I thought maybe you could use these. I thought he handed me the sneakers, which looked pretty normal. They even smelled kind of normal. Luke yelled, Maya! The white bird's wings sprouted out of the heels, startling me so much I dropped them. The shoes flapped around on the ground until the wings folded up and disappeared. Awesome, Grover said. Luke smiled. Those served me well when I was on my quest. Gift from Dad. Of course, I don't use them much these days. His expression turned sad. I didn't know what to say. It was cool that Luke had come to say goodbye. I'm afraid he might resent me for getting so much attention in the last few days, but he was giving me a magic gift, and it made me blush almost as much as Annabeth. Hey man, I said, thanks. Listen, Percy. Luke looked uncomfortable. A lot of hopes are riding on you, so kill some monsters for me, okay? We shook hands. Luke patted Grover's head between his horns, then gave a goodbye hug to Annabeth, who looked like she might pass out. After Luke was gone, I told her, you're hyperventilating. I'm not. You let him capture the flag instead of you. Why didn't you? Oh, why do I want to go anywhere with you, Percy? She stomped down the other side of the hill, where a white SUV waited on the shoulder of of the road. Argus followed, jingling his car keys. I picked up the flying shoes and had a sudden bad feeling. I looked at Cameron. I won't be able to use these, will I? No, he shook his head. Luke meant well, Percy, but taking to the air, that would not be wise for you. I nodded, disappointing, but then I got an idea. Hey, Grover, you want a magic item? His eyes lit up. Me? Pretty soon we had laced the sneakers over his fake feet, and the world's first flying goat boy was ready for lunch. Maya! He shouted. He got off the ground okay, but then fell over sideways. His backpack dragged through the grass. The winged shoes kept bucking up and down like tiny broncos. Practice, Karen called after him. You just need practice. Ah! Grover went flying sideways down the hill like a possessed lawnmower heading toward the fan. Before I could follow, Chiron caught my arm. I should have trained you better, Percy. If only I had more time. Hercules, Jason, they all got more training. That's okay, I just wish. I stopped myself. I was about to sound like a brat. I was wishing my dad had given me a cool magic item to help on the quest. Something as good as Luke's flying shoes or Annabeth's invisible cat. What am I thinking? Chiron cried. I can't let you go away without this. He pulled the pen out of his coat pocket and handed it to me. It was an ordinary disposable ballpoint. Black ink removal cap. Probably cost 3 cents. Gee, I said, thanks, Percy. That's a gift from your father. I've kept it for years, not knowing who you were, who I was waiting for. But the prophecy is clear to me. You are the one. I remembered the field trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art when I had vaporized Mrs. Dodd. Karen had thrown me a pen that turned into a sword. Could this be... Wait, one sec. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Could this be... I took off the cap. The pen grew longer, heavier in my hand. In a half second, I held a shimmering bronze sword with a double-edged blade, leather-wrapped grip, and a handle flat hilt riveted with gold studs. It was the first weapon that actually felt balanced in my hand. The sword has a long and tragic history that we need not go into, Chiron told me. Its name is Anaclusmos. Riptide, I translated, surprised the ancient Greek came so easily. Only use it for emergencies. Use it only for emergencies, Chiron says, and only against monsters. No hero should harm mortals unless absolutely necessary, of course. But this sword wouldn't harm them in any case. Use it on wouldn't harm them in any case. Wait, I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I looked at the wickedly sharp blade. What do you mean it wouldn't harm mortals? How could it not? This sword is celestial bronze, forged by the Cyclopes, tempered in the heart of Mount Etna, cooled in the river Lethe. It's deadly to monsters, to any creature from the underworld. Monsters to any creatures from the underworld, provided they don't kill you first. But the blade will pass through mortals like an illusion. There's simply not important enough for the blade to kill. And I should warn you, as a demigod, you can be killed by either celestial or normal weapons. You are twice as vulnerable. Good to know. Now I recap the pen. I touched the pen to the capsule. Instantly Riptide shrank into a ballpoint pen, tucked in my pocket. A little nervous because I was famous for losing pens at school. You can't, Chiron said. Can't what? Lose the pen, he said. It's enchanted. It'll always reappear in your pocket. I was wary, but I threw the pen as far as I could down the hill and watched it disappear in the grass. It may take a few moments. Now check your pocket. Sure enough, the pen was there. Okay, that's extremely cool, I admitted. But what if a mortal sees me pulling out a sword? Mist is a powerful thing, Percy. Mist? Yes. Read the Iliad. It's full of references to the stuff. Whenever divine or monstrous elements mix with the mortal world, they generate mist, which obscures the vision of humans. You will see things just as they are, being half, but the humans will interpret things quite differently. Remarkable, really, the lengths to which humans will go to fit things into their version of reality. I put Riptide back in my pocket. For the first time, the quest felt real. I was actually leaving Half-Blood Hill. I was heading west with no adult supervision, no backup plan, not even a cell phone. Aaron said cell phones were traceable, but by monsters. If we used one, it'd be worse than sending up a flare. I had no weapon stronger than a sword to fight off monsters and reach the land of the dead. Chiron, I said. When you said the gods are immortal, I mean there was a time before them, right? 4 ages before them, actually. The Titans, the time of the Titans with the fourth age, sometimes called the Golden Age, which is definitely a misnomer. This time of Western civilization and the rule of Zeus is the fifth age. So what was it like before the gods? Chiron pursed his lips. Even I am not old enough to remember that, child. But I know it was a time of darkness and savagery for mortals. Cronus, the Lord of Titan, called his reign the Golden Age. These men lived innocent, free of all knowledge, but that was mere propaganda. The Titan King cared nothing for your kind except appetizers or a source of cheap entertainment. It was only in the early reign of Lord Zeus, when Prometheus, the good Titan, brought fire to mankind, which our species began to progress. Even then, Prometheus was branded a radical thinker. Zeus punished him severely, as you may recall. Well, of course, eventually the gods warmed humans, and Western civilization was born. But the gods can't die now, right? I mean, as long as Western civilization is alive, they're alive. So even if I fail, nothing bad could happen. It would mess up everything, right? Don't give me a melancholy smile. No one knows how long the Age of the West will last, Percy. The gods are immortal, yes, but so are the Titans. They still exist, locked away in their various prisons, forced to endure endless pain, punishment, reduced in power, but still very much alive. May the fates forbid the gods ever suffer a doom, or that we should ever return to the darkness and chaos of the past. All we can do, child, is follow our destiny, assuming we know what that is. Relax, Chiron told me. Keep a clear head, and remember that you may be about to prevent the biggest war in human history. Relax, I said. I'm very relaxed. When I got to the bottom of the hill, I looked back under the pine tree that used to be Thalia, daughter of Zeus. Chiron was now standing full horseman form, holding his bow high and salute. Just your typical summer camp send-off by your typical centaur. Argus drove us out of the countryside into western land. Felt weird to be on the highway again. Annabeth and Grover were sitting next to me as if we were normal carpoolers. After 2 weeks at Camp Half-Blood Hill, the real world seemed like a fantasy. I found myself staring at every McDonald's, every kid in the back of his parents' car, every billboard and shopping mall. So far, so good. I told Annabeth, 10 malls and not a single monster. She gave me an irritated look. It's bad luck to talk that way. Seaweed drained. Remind me again, why do you hate me so much? I don't hate you. Could have fooled me. She folded her cap of invisibility. Okay, look, we're just not supposed to get along, okay? Our parents are rivals. Why? How many reasons do you want? One time my mom caught Poseidon with his girlfriend in Athena's temple, which is hugely disrespectful. Another time, Athena and Poseidon competed to be the patron god of the city of Athens. Your dad created some stupid saltwater spring as his gift, but my mom created the olive tree. People saw that her gift was better, so they named the city after her. They must really like olives. Oh, forget it. Now if she'd invented pizza, that I could understand. I said forget it. In the front seat, Argus smiled. He didn't say anything, but one blue eye on the back of his neck winked at me. Traffic slowed us in Queens. By the time we got into Manhattan, it was sunset and starting to rain. Argus dropped us up at the Greyhound station on the Upper East Side, not far from my mom and Gabe's apartment. I taped to a mailbox with soggy flyer with my picture on it. Have you seen this boy? I ripped it down before Annabeth and Grover could notice. Argus unloaded our bags, made sure we got our bus tickets, then drove away, the eye on the back of his hand, opening to watch us as he pulled out of the parking lot. I thought about how close I was to my old apartment. On a normal day, my mom would be home from the candy store right now. Smelly Gabe was probably there right now playing poker, not even missing her. Grover shouldered his backpack. He gazed down the street, the direction I was looking. You want to know why she married him, Percy? I stared at him. Were you reading my mind or something? Just your emotions, he said. I gotta wrap it up. Let's just say that's part one. Grover can read emotions. Woo! Woo! Oh, I gotta end it.